A lot of internet nerd ink gets spilled over the ways the Empire could have beaten the Rebellion, or at least their best and worst strategies. Recently, I even did a video on one of the Imperial tactics I thought was most effective, being the political ousting of Admiral Akbar under Thrawn. Today, though, we're going to be talking about a specific ship, and why it's not the godsend it's often made out to be, the Lancer-class frigate. The 250-meter Lancer class was introduced following the Battle of Yavin, when it became obvious the Empire needed a cure for what was known as Trench Run disease, where capital ships in stations like the Death Star were vulnerable to smaller craft like the X-Wings and Y-Wings. The Lancer boasted 20 powerful quad laser cannons, each independently fire-controlled with a system adapted from TIE bombers, making it perfect for taking out enemy starfighters. There is some inconsistency on when it was introduced, with the Coruscant Nights trilogy including a mention of the Lancer-class frigate pretty soon after the events of Episode 3, which is obviously about 20 years before Episode 4. This is best handled, in my opinion, as being an earlier iteration of the same ship before the demand for the ship arose, or a different ship class with the same name, which isn't really that uncommon itself. Whichever explanation you go with, the demand for the Lancer class after Yavin was spearheaded by an admiral named Ilan Drez, who argued that, quote, "Until an anti-starfighter screening vessel is brought into service, every capital ship in the fleet is in imminent danger." Despite this new demand for the Lancer, it was never put into much widespread use. For one thing, the cost was prohibitive. The Empire was able to build much larger ships for much smaller prices, though this doesn't really address the core utility of the ship, or the very common arguments that if the Empire had just spent the money to build more of them, they would have been able to crush the Rebellion. There were, however, two primary and, in my opinion, connected reasons that the Lancer would not have been able to beat the Rebellion regardless of whether the Empire built more of them or not. For one thing, the ship was incredibly slow, and for another, the Rebellion never really engaged in many of the attacks the Lancer was designed to thwart. For the latter point, Drez claimed their presence was what prevented the attacks, which I think does tie into why it wasn't effective, but as other in-universe characters point out, there weren't enough to go around for that to have been the case. The Rebellion would have known that they were limited. Aside from weak shielding making it vulnerable to other capital ships, which were scarce in the Rebellion either way, the real killer for the Lancer was its slow speed. The ability to kill a bunch of starfighters is simply not that meaningful when you can't catch up to those starfighters. Increasing the speed of the heavily loaded frigate would mean generating more power, which would mean either a bulkier size, a massively increased cost for more efficient reactors if they existed, or removing some of the weaponry, reducing some of its effectiveness against the starfighters, and even increasing the bulk of the ship would have done this, since it's essentially a large tube, so if the ship is bulkier, the weapons end up slightly more spread out. Without that speed, though, Rebel starfighters would simply be able to get away. Lancers excelled as escort frigates, but the Rebellion, as fighting a guerrilla war, rarely were doing full-out assaults on Star Destroyers or other kinds of things that the Lancers would be escorting. And the Rebellion knew that pitched military engagements were never going to be in their interest in the first place. As the previously mentioned Imperials who were skeptical of the Lancer would point out, this was rarely their modus operandi. They were never going to be enough Lancers to protect every possible Rebel target, and while they could prove devastating when in the right place at the right time, the starfighters would still have a chance to get away, even if they were ambushed. So while an effective Imperial strategy could definitely include Lancers, I think their ability to outright win the war if they had been spammed more is often heavily overstated. What do you think though? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know why in the comments. If you have other topics you'd like to see me cover in future videos, leave those in the comments as well. We're quickly approaching 25,000 subscribers after having just hit 20,000, so if you've been enjoying the videos and aren't subbed yet, maybe do that as well. Or leave a like. Either way, hope you've enjoyed the video and hope to see you next time.